Good afternoon. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Welcome to Psych 241 again. It's good to see everybody. It looks like we've got 4 or 5 people here. I've just been chatting with Ashley Guthrie a little bit. She stopped by to say hello. It's good to see everybody. Hi, Etta. Etta, it's good to see you. So we're going to have our first class, our first Wednesday webinar in over a month tonight. I hope everybody is excited about that. Don't forget to watch the videos. Don't forget to watch the videos before you get there tonight. So we're going to be talking a little bit about how your brain changes in adulthood, and we're going to be talking about co-parenting tonight. I've got some really interesting videos about co-parenting, and we're going to ask the question, would you be willing to co-parent with somebody that you didn't want to have a romantic relationship? Let's say you wanted a child but not a spouse or a lover. How could you negotiate that? I'm sure some of you out there might be interested in doing something like that. So we're going to talk about that tonight, and I've got some really interesting videos for you. It looks like Jay is checked in. Hello, Jay. Etta, you've got a full refrigerator. Did you fill it with stuff from Asheville or what? I'd be curious to know. So it's good to see everybody. We've got a small crowd today. I hope some more people log in, but we've got you, and that's all I need. So we'll go ahead and get started. No, oh my goodness, nothing from Asheville, huh? So it's going to be all domestic Raleigh, the local store. Okay, fair enough. So we're going to talk a little bit about some personality theories, Erikson and Levinson. We're going to talk about how life changes as you get a little bit older. We'll talk a little bit about stress coping, and then we're going to finish up talking about grandparenting and close relationships. As you get to my age in your 50s, unless your boys are shy and don't have girlfriends like mine don't, this is the age when you may start to have grandchildren. So we're going to talk about all that. Wow, Etta went to Charleston 2 weeks ago. You've gone to all the really cool, hip places, Etta. Wow, you need to check out Savannah, Georgia next. That's a really great place. So let's go ahead and get started if we could. So generally speaking, middle adulthood is a time of well-being, and I will tell you that I was an anxious and uncertain 18-year-old. I was anxious and uncertain in my 20s when I was a student and trying to get into graduate school, and then in my early 30s, I'm getting the career started, and I'm the youngest man on the totem pole. And you know what? Now that I'm in my 40s and 50s, I feel more comfortable than I've ever felt in my life. And you know what? My wife tells me she has the same sort of feelings. And I think as you get a little bit older, yeah, your bones creak a little bit, and it's a little bit tougher to move around. Maybe you're not as good as you once were. But one of the things that happens as you get a little bit older is you get more confident and secure in your life. And you know what? For the most part, the data suggests that people feel more purpose, more a sense of autonomy. They feel more of a sense of environmental mastery and positive relationships. Most aspects of well-being improve during middle adulthood. This is a time of great confidence, right? And so you should look forward to that, my 20-something friends. All of those anxieties and feelings of inferiority are going to melt away as you move into your 40s and 50s, and you're going to start to feel like the master of your own domain. All right? Now, we've been talking about Erik Erikson over the course of this semester, his ego theory of personality, and Erik Erikson would suggest that at this age we're in the 7th stage of personality development, a stage he calls generativity versus stagnation. When we're trying to balance the needs of ourselves, becoming great workers, becoming famous people, achieving everything we ever wanted to achieve, as well as the desire of leaving legacies and taking care of those people who rely on us. So at this point in my life, I have a career, but I also have children. I have a career, but I also have older parents that need taken care of. So at this point, what Erikson argues is that people are being pulled between a desire to create their own legacy for themselves and create a legacy for other people. So we're talking about being growing and being healthy as we possibly can, taking care of our children. We call parental generativity, getting the most we can out of our careers, and really fitting in and appreciating the world in which we live in. Now, he argues that some people spend their life thinking about everyone else. And sometimes you can get lost in taking care of others and you can lose who you are as a human being. So a lot of times we think stereotypically of the overworked mother who takes care of the kids and the husband and the grandparents and loses her own sense of identity. We might call that overextension. So one way you can mess this theory up is by focusing too much on the legacy of other people and forgetting your own needs. We'll call that overextension. On the other hand, some people still haven't figured out that they live in a community of people, and you've got to help the kids, you've got to help the grandparents, and some people can be self-absorbed during this stage as well. So in a sense, we're sort of managing these two competing motives. The motive to be the best that we can be, and the motive to take care of those around us and leave this world a better place. You know what? In truth, we're continually dealing with all the tasks of adulthood in a continual reinterpretation of the self. So I'm still working on my identity, even as a 50-year-old. I'm still working on intimacy and isolation as a husband and father at this age. And I'm still trying to work on myself as having a career, leaving a legacy. So in a sense, human beings are working on all three of these stages during our adult life. You're always trying to figure out who you are. You're always trying to manage your close relationships, and you're always trying to leave a legacy. You know? Now, and some people even talk about during this stage having what we might call the identity crisis. And the idea here is always of the husband or wife that comes home one day and says, you know what, I can't do this anymore. Life has just changed and I have to become a new person. And they go out and leave their spouse, leave their kids, and develop a whole new identity. The question is, do we have these sort of identity crises, these middle-age identity crises? And the answer is probably not. And what I'd like to do is introduce you to the scientist Levinson's periods of adult development. And he asked the question, are identity crises normal? And he published a book called The Seasons of a Man's Life, and he actually got some criticisms and went back and did another interview and wrote The Seasons of a Woman's Life. And he interviewed successful men and women to find out exactly what was going on during their adult life. And what he found was that most people in their lives are going to go through stable periods and transitions, right? So for the last 15 or 20 years, I've been raising 2 kids and focused on my career at Wake Tech. I've been in a stable period. But now my kids have grown up, they're adults, they're both getting their own careers. My career is winding down. I would argue that I'm in a transition period myself. I was actually chatting with Ashley a few minutes ago about the transition period that I'm feeling right now. And for me, I'm wanting to go out and explore and to be a traveler more. This summer I'm going to be spending a month in Puerto Rico, and then a month in upstate New York, and then some time in Boston. And for me, it's a time of transition. For me, it's a time of transition in my life. And so what these people that Levinson interviewed said is that you in your life are going to go through periods of stable times where you're focused on something, and then it's going to be normal for you to go through transitions in your life. Now, we all start out with the dream. And for me, as a young 20-year-old, my dream was to be a fancy psychology professor. Now, I'm going to have to be honest, I didn't think it was going to be in community college teaching wonderful people like yourself. I instead thought I'd be walking the Ivy halls, writing books, doing famous psychology experiments. But I had the dream, and that's sort of a vision for your future life. And what these folks argued was that they all started out with a dream. And each and every one of you is going to have to figure out what your dream is. As I was talking with Ashley, she was sort of going over her competing dreams that she's thinking about right now. She loves the airline industry, and she's really interested in the travel and the fun that it affords her. But she's telling me that she's not sure if maybe her dream lies in a different path. Maybe she needs to be a scientist or even a neuroscientist. So each and every one of us as a young adult has to figure out what our dream is. And that's what these people suggested, that we all develop a dream, and then we go through stable periods and transitions where we focus on the dream, and then we may adjust the dream a little bit. And then they talked about this period of what they call boom, becoming your own man, which is sort of coming into your own. You start out with the dream, and it's just an idea, and then at some point, you actually fulfill that dream. And I woke up one day and I realized, holy cow, I'm a successful community college professor. And it made me happy, and it made me confident, and I finally sort of realized that I was where I was supposed to be. Let's call this boom, becoming your own man, or boo, becoming your own woman, right? And so this is when you sort of focus on that career and that development, and you become who you are going to be. Now, these people all argued that as you transition into your 40s and 50s, you're going to come to grips with 4 conflicts. And I swear to God, this is the God's honest truth, because that's what that's what I'm dealing with right now as a 50-year-old man. I think about the dichotomy of being young versus being old, and I now realize that I'm an older guy, and I'm not that young buck that I thought I was. In my 20s, I thought of myself as a 16-year-old. I'm this kid, I'm this kid. But all of a sudden, one day you wake up and you realize you're not as young as you once were. And you realize that there's a dichotomy between the silliness of youth and the comfort of old, right? And you sort of have to focus on the times in your life when you were constructive and did things that helped the world, and the aspects of yourself that are destructive. And I spend a lot of time thinking about some of the more destructive things I did as a young kid, and I don't know why I did those things. But you sort of realize that there are ways in which you can be a constructive person in your world, or the things that you can do that are destructive. And you sort of start to realize the difference between the things you did in your life that were useful and the things that you did in your life that were not useful. Well, thank you very much. I'm now looking at the comments bar. I'm sorry I got started. Stephanie, it's good to see you. Karita, it's good to see you. Etta, thank you very much for the comment. And you know what? As you get older, you start to really think about your youthful ideas of what it means to be a man or a woman. And you start to realize that the things that you did, or at least for me, the things that I did to try to prove to other people that I was a man, I kind of now see how ridiculous I was. And I now understand that the things that I used to think of as feminine are, you know what, maybe good aspects that I should have as a successful man in my life. You know what? You don't have to be a tough hard ass to be a man. You can also be caring and comforting. And I've learned that part of what makes me a good man are some aspects of my life that I would have called girly early in my life. You know what I mean? So you start to realize the dichotomy between masculinity and femininity, and you start to realize that the whole person has aggressiveness, but also has nurturing abilities, right? You start to sort of lose those silly youthful ideas that you had. And you start to think about the value of your attachments versus being separated. Some days I wake up and I think, gee, boy, wouldn't it be cool if I wasn't married and didn't have all these kids and I could do what I want and be my own man. Again, I was chatting this up with Ashley a little bit early. And you know what? Sometimes I think it would be cool if I was my own person out there on my own by myself. But then, there's value in having a community of people and the love of my life and the love of my wife and my children. That has a value too. So you start to think about this dichotomy as well. And so middle adulthood, exactly, right? And unfortunately, a lot of my friends are still super duper macho and think that nurturing and caring is not a masculine quality. In fact, as I've gotten older, I think nothing is more masculine than being a caring person, because it shows you have the power and you have enough love in your life that you can share it. But as a young man, you don't want anybody to think you're a soft man. And, but as I've gotten older, I've realized that one of the best male characteristics that I have is the ability to nurture, to take care of other things, right? Now, this is a culture-bound theory. It was conducted originally on American men, successful American men, and then successful American women. So one of the drawbacks of this theory is this may not really work for every culture. And I don't know, Etta, you're from Poland. I don't know how similar or different Poland is, but if I have any of you from the Middle East or from Asia or from other cultures, it may be different in your country. So this may be a culture-bound theory. Now, most research does not support the idea of a universal midlife crisis. Don't think of it as a midlife crisis. Instead, think of it as a midlife understanding. You sort of come to a deeper understanding of the world. You may change directions, but it's not necessarily a crisis. It's an awakening, if you will. Now, midlife crises do occur, but usually they're often caused by a life event. Maybe an unexpected death of somebody, maybe a divorce, maybe a career change. Midlife crises do happen, but they're not common for most people. Yeah, right. And I think, in fact, I feel sorry for some of my male friends, Etta, who cannot show their emotions. I don't think anything is sadder than a person who keeps their emotions trapped up in their body. That's not healthy. That doesn't help build relationships. And, instead of looking up to those kinds of men, as I might have done as a young man, I actually feel sorry for them. It's good points. You're making some really good points, Etta. Now, one of the things I will tell you that sort of raises its ugly head in middle age is stress, man. Stress. And you know why? It's because you are in charge of the world. As a 20-year-old man, all I had to do was get myself out of bed and get to work. Now I have to worry about my kids getting to school, my kids getting through college, my kids getting career. I can't tell you how nerve-wracking it is to have children and worry about whether or not they are going to be successful. You absolutely won't believe it. And those of you who have arguments with your parents and say your parents spend too much time worrying about you, you do not understand what's going to happen when you become parents, because you're going to build these little beautiful babies and you're going to have the hopes and dreams for them. And when they grow up, they're not going to follow your path that you have set in your mind, and it's going to cause all kinds of stress. And the first time your teenage children bring the police home, and it happened to me too, and it happened to my parents, you're going to say, oh my God, what have I done? And all you're going to do is spend your time worrying about that. Meanwhile, you're going to have parents that are older and retired and need help. And so they may not have saved enough money for their retirement, so they may be short on cash. They're going to be sick. They're going to need help. And you know what? You're going to be a manager in your job. You're finally going to be at the top of your career, so you're going to be in charge of people. And it's going to be on you to keep that business running. And you are just going to have, you've done everything right, but everything is now on top of you. Kids, parents, jobs. And you're really going to experience a great deal of stress during my age group. Now, let's differentiate between daily hassles and major life stressors. Daily hassles are typically negative things that happen on a daily basis. Traffic, feeding the kids, paying the bills, that annoying habit that your husband or wife has. And major life stressors don't happen that often, and they're usually big, but they may be positive or negative. So if you've ever gotten married, that's a freaking positive thing, but it is incredibly stressful planning a wedding. Having a baby is incredibly positive, but it's also incredibly stressful. Having the death of a parent, or having the death of a child, or losing your job, these are major life events. So you can sort of class the stressors that affect us in terms of the daily hassles that happen every day that are always negative, and these big major life events that may be positive or negative that really cause us to have to change and respond to difficult events. Now, most middle-aged adults, as I suggested to you, we're going to experience overload stressors. It's just too much, man. The job, the career, the kids, the parents, it's just lots. Now, the cool thing is, as I suggested to you, I'm feeling in grocery shopping, Stephanie. Yes, grocery shopping's a pain in the ass too, right? Now, the deal is, as I suggested to you, our feelings of well-being are at a peak right now. I feel like master of the world. I have never felt as powerful as I feel as a 51-year-old man. So my feelings of control are peaking and are peaking at this age. But here's the deal: I've got so much coming at me now, and so it's always this battle between my feelings of being powerful and these overload stressors that are coming towards me. Now, your book does suggest that males and females may respond to stress differently. Now, I'm sure all of you have heard of the fight or flight response. This term was coined by Walter Cannon as the response that human beings have to stressor. He always thought of it as an aggressive, strongly emotional response, and he called it the fight or flight response. Now, later research, now again, that research may be culture bound as well. A lot of the early research in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s was done on college students who were primarily male. And so research may have suggested that we all engaged in that when that was more of a male sort of response. Later researchers have suggested that maybe females respond to stress with a different sort of response called the tend and befriend response. So they seek out friends and build social alliances. So whereas men may respond to stress with anger, with aggressiveness, with drinking, and these other problematic behaviors, females, on the other hand, may spend time talking it out with their friends. And so there are people who think that maybe the different sexes respond to stress differently during this age. Now, if any of you are interested, I have a life event scale that assesses your major life stressors and can predict whether or not you will have a stress-related illness during the next 12 months. I think if you score over 200 on this scale, you are at an increased likelihood for having a stress-based sickness during the next 12 months. And so, and also, I've actually got a scale. I didn't provide it for you, but here are some examples of sort of daily hassles and uplifts that people sort of feel. Look at on the left, the daily hassles. These are the things that bring you down, the most common things that bring people down. And if you look on the right, here are the things on the right that most commonly bring people up. You know, Etta, you said you like grocery shopping. I do like that too. Maybe that's sort of completing a task. You get sort of a feeling of completion when you finish a task, Etta. I'd be interested. Um, Weight is correct for me. Absolutely. For me, it's freaking home maintenance. Having to cut the yard or get the boys to cut the yard annoys the crap out of me. Paying my taxes annoys the crap out of me. Weight, and yet my dad's kind of older now and he's always kind of sickly. So that's sort of a daily hassle for me, too. Um, oh, there you go. Etta likes to cook. You know, cooking a good meal also gives one a sense of completing a task, too. And if you can get some good sleep or go to a good meal, shoot, that makes you feel good. So these are sort of examples of daily hassles and daily uplifts that people might feel. Now, when you go to your 20th school reunion or your 25th school reunion, I think I went to my, let's see, 1747. I went to my 30th high school reunion a while back. Holy cow. And it was amazing to see how people developed over the course of 30 years. And people who I thought were going to turn out to be total losers came to the 30th reunion and they were absolutely kicking ass. And then there were some people who I knew at 17 were going to be the most amazing people in the world, came to the 30th reunion, and then I realized that they were incredibly unhappy and that their life hadn't turned out well. So the question is, what sort of affects this outcome? Because it can't just be your talent as a 17-year-old. It can't be any sort of genetic endowment. It's sort of a larger, it's the larger picture really affects who you become and how you develop into an adult. And so the contemporary life events framework sort of gives us an idea of what determines how we develop as adults and what turns that 17-year-old Chris Roddenberry into the 47-year-old Chris Roddenberry, or the 17-year-old Etta into the, you're going to be 47 one year Etta. I'm not trying to give you any age, but the one day 47 Etta, right? And so really there are a lot of factors that come into it. So it maybe the one that looked 17 successful at 17 felt pressure. Absolutely. You know, maybe Etta. You know, a lot of times our parents push us so hard in high school that we rebel after we get out of high school. Now, I eventually turned out well, but I promise you, right after high school, I rebelled and became a complete idiot for about 5 years. And my life was heading sort of in a negative direction as well. And so, yes, as you said, Etta, where you come from sort of affects what you're going to be. So for my wife, she grew up in a very country conservative, conventional background. And if it was up to her family, she would never have become anything. Her family didn't want her to go to college. They told her if she did get a job, she should get a job as a nurse or a school teacher. So where you come from sort of can affect who you become. But then what happens to you? My wife ran into me, and I grew up in a very unconventional family. And I told my wife, I did go to college. I took the 6-year route, Etta, because I had to spend a couple of years drinking my life away because I thought that was what would piss my father off. And I had to realize that although it was pissing my dad off, it wasn't doing me any good. So I finally realized I was living against my father and decided to start living for myself. But in a sense, where you come from can affect how you traject off into adulthood. Like I said, my wife was not going anywhere until she met me. And I told her, that's kind of stupid. You love working at the Pinehurst Hotel. You're good at business. Why don't you focus on that? And it was really the encouragement of myself that caused my wife to buck against her conventional upbringing and become a business major. And now she runs this hotel and she has an amazing career and she is so happy. But it is not the life that her parents wanted for her. They wanted her to stay in the hometown, not move away and become a school teacher. She wanted to move away and become a business leader. And it took a life event like meeting Crazy Roddenberry that helped her happen. And at the same time, there are rules that may affect what you can and can't do. I have a lot of students. I have a lot of students who come from the Middle East or from other countries where there are rules of what men and what females can do. And so those are sort of the rules that determine what you can become. And then there are, of course, those individual qualities that determine who you are. So you can think of that transition from that 17-year-old kid to that 47-year-old person coming back to the high school reunion is affected by a lot of categories. So Stephanie Diab was the black sheep as well. That's okay. Sometimes the black sheep become the most successful people because they're not afraid to break a rule or two, and they can think out of the box. And yes, Etta, it is weird how you can sort of get judged through the prism of your brothers and sisters. You know, you said you had an Etta. My parents didn't think I will ever finish college because they looked at me through the prism of my sister who did. You know, I had the same thing. I came from a huge family of 9 brothers and sisters. None of them went to college. None of them really ever became anything. And so when I finally came around, there was huge pressure on me to become the chosen one. And I think that's what caused me to rebel as a teenager, because I didn't want all of the expectations that my father put on me. They sent you here to the U.S. They wanted to get rid of you, huh, Etta? Well, I'm glad you're here living the life, visiting Asheville and Charleston, and making my developmental psychology class just a little bit better. So I'm glad you're here, Etta. Okay, so personality, stability, and change. Now, does your personality change as you get older? Well, yes it does, and no it doesn't. Okay, so there's I'm going to talk about 3 studies. The Baltimore study looked at 1,000 college students from 1950 to now. And what they did was they focused on the personality test called the Big 5 Personality Inventory. If you folks were in my introductory class last semester, you took the Big 5 Personality Test. And they focused on the 5 qualities measured by that test: emotional stability, what we call neuroticism, extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. And what they found is that all of us change as we get older. We're all going to become a little less extroverted as we get older. We're all going to become a little less open to experience as we get older. We're all going to become more agreeable as we move into middle and late adulthood. But the weird thing is, we change in an absolute sense, but since all of us change together, we all stay the same comparison to their peer group. So the deal is, I am way more agreeable as a human being than I was as a 17-year-old. In an absolute sense, Chris Roddenberry is a more agreeable person than he was at 17 years of age. However, all of my peers changed as well. So compared to my 51-year-old peers, I'm still the disagreeable person in my cohort. Does that make sense? And then the research showed that neuroticism, or emotional instability, does not peak in middle age. So it's not like we have this emotional crisis in middle age. In fact, we become a little more emotionally stable as we move into adulthood. Okay, now another study, the Berkeley Longitudinal Study, looked at 500 adolescents starting in the 1920s. And what they found, they didn't look at personality traits, they looked at some other sort of personality characteristics: intellectual orientation, self-confidence, and openness to experience. And they found that these traits tended to stay the same. If you were an intellectual person at 17, a self-confident person, and an open person that liked to try new things at 17, you were still going to be that kind of person as an adulthood. And you know what? I'm still a nerd. I'm still totally arrogant. And I still love to try new things. That was Chris Roddenberry at 17, and that's now Chris Roddenberry at 51. My wife is not really interested in trying new things. She wasn't like that as a 17-year-old when I met her. And you know what? she's still the kind of person that I have to beg and push into doing things. I love to travel. She's always afraid to travel. So I have to drag her by her hair onto the plane to get her into an adventure. I mean that metaphorically. Y'all don't call the law on me, okay? Now, characteristics that change the most. In this study, they found the degree to which people were nurturant or hostile. So people were able to evolve. And I would argue that that's sort of true of me. I'm less angry and hostile than I was as a 17-year-old. And you know what? I do feel like I'm a more nurturant person than I was at 17. Etta like that, huh? Yeah, can you imagine me just grab her? I have to drag that woman into fun. I swear to God, she just wouldn't know how to have fun if it came up and hit her in the head. So I had to help her. And whether or not they had good self-control. So people can develop feelings of self-control. Now, one final study was done by Helen Mills, starting in, yeah, I know you became lazy. That's because you were around us North Carolinians. Us Southerners are kind of lazy, right? Right? So Helen Mills did a study with 132 women from a female college in the 50s through the 80s, and she asked them what they were like, what they were interested in doing as college students, and then she went back and asked them what made them happy as adults. And she found that for these females, a commitment to family, to work, or both was related to happiness, having a sense of commitment. So it doesn't matter if you decide to become a house husband, as I did. I was a community college teacher and took care of the boys and did more of the work while my wife went out and ran her hotel. It doesn't matter if you focus on family or work or both, but as long as you're really committed to that and you really feel like it's valued, she found that that was related to happiness. Now, if you get pushed into work or pushed into family and that's not your bag, this is what leads to feelings of unhappiness. And she found that most of these females, even though the 50s through the 80s, most of them grew up in very conventional worlds where they were more housewives than employees. She found that most of them didn't experience midlife crises as much as they experienced midlife consciousness. The difference between a crisis and a consciousness, one is knowledge, the other is knowledge and angst. So you sort of evolve and understand who you are and what you've done, but they didn't necessarily experience the angst and the sadness of their decisions. Okay? Now, personality qualities and outcomes. The Baltimore, I'd just like to talk a little bit more about the Baltimore longitudinal study. Personality traits in your personality style does affect your health and well-being in middle and later adulthood. People who are higher in openness to experience, who are open to experiences, are more likely to report better health and well-being, and they're less likely to experience negative effects in response to stressors because they're open to experience, and so stressors don't bother them as much. People high in consciousness are more likely to live longer and report lower stress because they're engaged in healthy behaviors, they don't eat as much or drink as much, they go to work and do that good job, so they report lower stress and they're more likely to have professional success in their life. People who are extroverted and like to be around other people and be active are more likely to live longer and more satisfied in their relationships. People high in agreeableness are more likely to live longer. If you're a disagreeable person and you get angry like Dr. Roddenberry, you're more likely to have that massive heart attack and fall over. And if you're a disagreeable person, it's hard to really sustain that romantic relationship. People who experience neurotic emotions like anger and anxiety die younger and have more health problems, and they don't deal as well with stress. So, if you haven't taken the Big 5 personality inventory, send me an email and I will send you a link to this personality test, and you can find out what your personality style is, and maybe you can start working to develop a healthier personality. It is hot here in the South. That's why That's why Southern people talk so slow and with such a funny sort of accent. I think it's just hard for us to talk sometimes, so we tend to slur our words and draw them out. Now, a fellow named George Vaillant did a study to figure out, are certain lifestyles healthier than others. So he conducted he looked at 268 socially advantaged Harvard graduates, 456 socially disadvantaged inner city men, and 90 middle socioeconomic status intellectually gifted women born in 1910. So he looked at really fancy, well-bred Harvard graduates, poor inner city men, and relatively gifted women. And what he did was he did surveys at 50 and then went and looked back at these same people at 75 to 80 years of age. And he sort of grouped these people based on their survey responses into three groups. He found that some of his people were what he would call happy and well people. And he found that these people, excuse me, I misspoke. And he went and looked at these people at 80. And he found that he could group these people at 80 into three groups based on their survey responses. He found that those people at 50 who were getting exercise, maintaining good weight, had a good marriage, were thinking about the future, and were active and educated, he found that those people were most likely to end up in the category of what he would call happy and well at the age of 80. Those people who were super duper happy, healthy, and doing really well. He found another group of people were what he would call the sad and sick people. These people were more likely to be depressed, more likely to be unhappy, more likely to report poorer relationships with other people, and these people tended to be more sick. And then he found that some of the people that he interviewed at 50 were dead at 80. And he found that the people who were dead at the second interview time tended to be those who were drinking more alcohol, smoking, and engaging in sort of these unhealthy behaviors. So, the deal is getting into a good place, being exercised and fit, and having good relationships during middle age are going to help you later on in life. Now, he found that income level at 50, it's not about the money. It's whether or not you're physical and living in a healthy lifestyle and have people around you and are positive about your future. It's more about what's going on in the mind as opposed to how much cash you have. So not abusing alcohol, being in a stable marriage, exercising, having good weight, and learning how to deal with the stresses of life are going to help you live a longer, healthier life and be the happy, well 80-year-old that George Vaillant was talking about. Now, grandparents, starting my age, you may or may not start being grandparents. Now, remember we talked about we talked about longevity and the rectangularization of life. And you know what? That means a lot of people are living to later ages, which means more people have grandparents alive now. Did you know in 1900, only 4% of 10-year-olds had all four grandparents? But you know what? In 2020, 80% of 30-year-olds still have living grandparents. My grandmother on my dad's side lived until I was 35, I think. My wife and I are now in our 50s, and Nana here is rocking. This picture is actually old. She just had her 101st birthday. And so longevity is making grandparenting a growth industry now. So what's in it for you as a grandparent? When my kids do have grandparents, what's that's going to do for me as a human being? You know what? A lot of grandparents suggest that they have sort of a sense of continuity and reward in maintaining this circle of life. When your kids have kids, you sort of understand You finally begin to understand what life's all about. As you're a kid, you don't understand what life's about. And then when you have kids, you're too busy. It's the first time you've seen people growing up because you were a kid and didn't appreciate it when you were a child. But you see it children for the first time. You're still kind of locked in this mindset where you don't understand the cycle of life. But when your kids have kids, the second time around the circle, you begin to really understand this thing called the circle of life and death. And you know what? Nana is at peace with her potential death like I could never be, because I think she understands the nature of life and death. Now, being a grandparent can also, that's a good point. I waited till I was in my 30s to have kids, and my boys look like they're going to wait until their 30s at least to have kids. So you're right. I'm going to be 65 or 70 before my kids are ever born, if I live that long. So you're right. The fact that we're stretching out childhood may work against this trend. That's a really good point, Etta. Having grandkids and having somebody to play with, because the parents will leave the grandkids with you, it really gives grandparents a sense of companionship and a sense of usefulness. One of the things that happens as you get older is your kids grow up and they don't need you anymore. You get rid of that job and you retire. Your social circle really begins to shrink. And you know what? Having friends, having companions, having people to talk to is a very important part of being happy and healthy. And so grandchildren can really create emotional fulfillment and feelings of usefulness for older adults. Now, if you think back on your grandparents, you're going to find that they probably fall into one of three grandparent types. You have your typical formal grandparents that see you and they love you and they're friendly with you, but they act like grandparents when they're around you, and they treat you like a grandchild. Some grandparents, on the other hand, are what you might call fun-seeking grandparents that are always playing with you. So they may actually get childish in a sense that they want to take you out and see you as a playmate, if you will, the fun-seeking parents. And then some grandparents are the distant grandparents. They're benevolent, but they're not really interested in being around you that much. So you can think about three grandparenting styles: the formal grandparents, the fun-seeking grandparents, and the distant figure grandparents. Nana's more of a formal grandparent. She plays the role of grandparent, and she hands out cash on birthdays and holidays, but she's not really going to interact with you in sort of a fun sort of way. On the other hand, my grandpa Adam, who died when I was a young man, he was the kid that the person who took me hunting and fishing and to the park, and we were always doing fun things together. And so he was sort of my fun-seeking grandparent. And so I'd like for you to think back on your grandparents and see what kind of a role they played. Now, it turns out that grandparents also serve a very useful role here in America. In 2004, 10% of all U.S. children lived with a grandparent. And a lot of these grandparents were really young. Now, grandparents who provide full-time care are at an elevated risk for stress and depression. Grandparents need to be grandparents. When they're forced into the role of arbitrary parent, it really is something that is a little bit overwhelming for people in their 50s and 60s. Now, there's no negative effects associated with part-time grandparenting. It's just those grandparents that are raising a child on their own that are at the risk for stress and depression. Now, why do children wind up with their grandparents? You know what? Sometimes somebody will get pregnant with a child during the teenage years, and they just won't be equipped to handle that child. They won't be mature enough. Or they might be involved in drugs or have a drug problem, which doesn't allow them to take care of their own children. Or sometimes if parents get divorced and either parent is too stressed out trying to survive on their own, the children may wind up with a grandparent. So these are the most common reasons that children wind up with grandparents. Now, when children move in with grandparents, Most of them will move in with a grandmother by themselves. Some, 25% will move in with a grandmother and grandfather. Actually, I think more than that. And very few will actually move in with just a grandfather. Most of the time, it's either both grandparents, or half of the time, it's mostly a grandmother. Now, sometimes grandparents move in with the parents, and most of the time when that happens, it's a female grandparent. Now, it turns out that males die earlier. We don't have as good a life expectancy. So probably the reason that most of the grandparents moving in with parents or grandmothers is because grandfathers die. Okay. I'm running out of time real quick. Mothers and daughters have closer relationships during the adult years. Married men are more involved with their wives' families than with their own. I would be an exception to that because I'm pretty involved with my father and take care of him. But most of the time, it seems like the married man spends most of his time with the wives' families. And most of the time, it's the mother's intergenerational ties that are more influential. So you're going to see the grandparents on your mom's side more often than your your dad's side. And middle-aged adults express responsibility between generations. They often call us the sandwich generations. I'm taking care of the kids. I'm taking care of my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and my father, right? And so this is a lot of intergenerational play at work here. And you know what? A lot of times, though, as children grow up, the relationship with their parents isn't as close as it used to be. So I challenge all of you adults right now to get out of this class, hang up the phone, and call your mom or dad today. Okay? Now, security in marriage, security, loyalty, and mutual interest are more important in middle adulthood. As a young adult, you want that cash and you want that hot-looking romantic partner. But you know what? When you're my age, you're looking for security and loyalty at this point. And you know what? Most of us married at this age, most of us are satisfied with our marriages during midlife. But you know what? We are actually now getting divorced more often than our younger adults are. You would be surprised. While divorce rates have decreased for people in their 20 to 40-year-old range, I do have a lot of friends in my 40s and 50s now who are getting divorced, and that didn't used to happen. That's more common than it used to be. All right, I've taken up enough of your time today. We're 52 minutes into the lecture. I want to thank everybody for coming. It's been a great time. I hope to see everybody tonight at the webinar. Don't forget to watch the videos before you come. If you don't watch the videos, you won't have near as good a time, and I won't have near as good a time, okay? So log into webinars about 8 o'clock with your favorite frosty beverage, and I look forward to chatting with you about co-parenting. Have a great day. All right, let's end that stream.
Oh, yeah. That was good.
Thank you. Did you like that?